Welcome again to the Hello World podcast. My name is Sean Wildermuth and I am your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business. We talk about their first job, their first computer, their first code and language. I'm really excited today to have Chris Sells on our show. But as Chris's official bio says, he has a long history as a contributing member of the Windows developer community. He enjoys long walks on the beach and various computer technologies. Chris and I go way back, years and years, when I used to work for Chris back at Developmentor. We become really good friends, and I hope you can hear that in this episode. Let's get to the interview. Welcome to the Hello World podcast. I'm here with Chris Sells, my dear friend. In fact, my best man at my upcoming wedding.
Woohoo. Very much looking forward to that, Sean. That should be a party.
Are you? That sounds vaguely sarcastic.
No, actually, no. Well, let's be clear, right? Hot Atlanta, the end of May, beginning of June, right? This is not the best place on earth to be. That said, you are also a dear friend of mine, and I am incredibly honored to be named as your best man. And I will be there performing my abilities as well as possible.
That's awesome. And hopefully we'll have your birthday as well.
That's true. June 2nd. Right?
June 2nd.
And I'll be, it'll be kind of a big one. I'll be 45.
Wow. Do you want to tell the audience the address to send gifts? I mean, is that a good idea?
Yes. It's my PayPal address is csells@sellsbrothers.com.
That's awesome. So cash in kind only.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, what I want to do in this podcast is talk about how you got started. So when did you get your first computer?
So I actually got started before I got my first computer. If you want to talk about when I actually got started.
That is exactly what I want.
Okay. So that's only a short story, and then we can talk about my first computer, right? But I actually got started. So, when I was growing up, my mother was a single mother, and, she was a librarian. So she didn't have daycare options. So she would bring me to the library. So I was like 8, 9, 10, right? I was there and I grew up in the public library.
And they have computers there at the time.
Well, they did. So when this was 1977, right? So what they had was they had a 120 column terminal with the pin feed green and white striped paper, right? And I'm 7'8". I'm typing on this thing and it's connected to like a PDP-11 at some university somewhere. I don't know where it's connected, but what I do know is if I type maze and enter, I get a maze and I can get up my little pencil and I can trace the maze, or I can play Hunt the Wumpus, or I can play Oregon Trail, right? I can play all of these amazing games, and I'm 8 and I'm running a computer.
And the green screen and all that, right?
No, green, not green screen. I'm talking about the terminal. I typed and it went directly to paper.
Directly to paper.
And I pressed enter and the output would go directly to paper. There was no screen.
You're not that old. I mean, that's impossible.
No, that's what I was.
And then you put cards in?
No. There was I didn't get to program it, right? Somebody else, it was just a terminal. It was just a dumb terminal.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. This is where like programs like Edlin come from, right? I mean, VT100 terminal was a step up.
Right. Yeah. Because you could see it.
Exactly. You can see more than one line at a time. Exactly right. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. That's where I started. That's when I first got the bug. Yeah. But my first computer was, my mom got remarried and we had to move. They got laid off. They had to go and find new jobs. And so I had to move away and I lost all my friends. Those were the days when you would actually lose all your friends when you were a kid. You didn't have Facebook. You didn't have text messaging, right? I mean, I had to say goodbye to all my friends. She felt bad. She felt guilty. So she got me, as a way to increase my ability to be social in my new environment, she bought me a computer. Doesn't that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, no, exactly.
No, it doesn't.
So she spent $3,000
wow.
to buy me an Apple II Plus. And this thing had 2 disk drives, not to tape. These were disk drives.
5 1/4 inch, I suspect.
Absolutely. 5 1/4. This was a 40 column green screen. And it was all uppercase on the keyboard. There was no shift. There was no caps lock, no nothing. It was all uppercase. And when you put it on the screen, it was all uppercase. Now, at the time, I had a choice. I could have the Apple II Plus, or I could have the Apple IIe, which just came out. And that was 80 columns and it had lowercase. And I thought, lowercase is a fad. I don't need lowercase.
You still think that?
Yeah, I holler. All my emails are yelling all the time. Exactly right. And that is the first and only time in history where I didn't buy the top of the line computer, right? I just said, that's what I know. That'll be good enough. And I was 14.
Did you have them in school, and that's why you knew the difference, or what?
No, actually, we didn't have them in school. What happened was my friend had one in his basement, right? And he was my same age, and it was and he had a modem on his, and he could dial up to other computers, bulletin board systems around the world. And of course, that was back in the days when we had long distance charges, right? So he would dumpster dive for phone card numbers that he could use to make free phone calls around the world, literally to get to other bulletin board systems on his computer, right up until the day when the local police came up to his house and took his computer away for a year.
Wow.
And the way he was caught was not because of what he was doing, but because some girl he liked at school wanted to talk to her boyfriend long distance, and he wanted to seem cool. So he gave her one of these numbers, and she got caught and turned him in.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. This is why we like computers better than girls.
Much better than girls. I don't think my fiance will listen to this podcast.
Oh, probably no girls will listen to this. Well, hopefully. See, the world is a much better place now. There are actually women in tech today. In fact, I'm sure women will be listening, and that's a good thing. It's a much better thing than what it has been in the past. So that's
absolutely,
awesome.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's interesting because you say BBSs, and I love the fact that when I was a kid, I didn't have a Commodore, and we would go on BBSs, and you could pick out the Apple guys because they were screaming.
Sure, because they didn't have lowercase. Exactly right.
That was like the one thing we had on Apple, because even then it was sort of it was a little hipper to have an Apple than a Commodore at the time.
Yeah, it was. It was cool. Of course, that was Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and those were the cool things. And yeah, I remember. And then I was actually a full-time programmer in AppleSoft Basic. For 4 years, right? I would go to high school during the day, right?
Right.
I would come home and I would turn on Danger Mouse in my parents' basement, and I'd fire up that computer and I would play video games all day. And then I would run software. And then, as it turns out, I was writing software.
Yeah.
It turns out I was writing a forms-based database and reporting engine. I didn't know that. What I thought I was doing was writing software to keep track of my Dungeons and Dragons character sheets, right? But I had to use special control characters to get, the hit points and experience points to come out in bold on my Epson dot matrix printer, right? So I was doing report generation, and, all of those files were saved to the disk, and I could load them up and edit them and save them and print them. And it was a whole thing. I was writing software that we still write to this day.
Which is why you still do mostly Visual Basic, is that right?
Yes, exactly. I'm still stuck in Visual Basic. Well, 5. I don't want to go to 6 yet because I heard that's obsolete, so I'm staying at 5.
Good call.
Yes.
Wow. And so you sold the company. Oh, wait.
No, right. No, that's how I get started, right? When we bought that Apple II Plus, it was $48K, and we got the $16K upgrade to $64K. I know, that was a big deal. And I would learn to program by reading these things called magazines, which apparently, do you hear the FAA has now made magazines obsolete?
That's what I heard.
That's right, because the only reason I use magazines is for takeoff and landing, right? And now I don't even need that. I can just use.
I've had now 4 flights with.
Really?
And it's real? Amazing.
It's real?
It's amazing.
It actually works?
It does.
I had no idea.
I can now get into my zone before we leave the gate.
That's awesome.
And I put it down when I have to put my shoes on.
Are we talking about like an iPad, or you can actually do this with a laptop?
No, laptops have to be put away.
Okay.
Until 10,000 feet, but any tablet that they think looks like a Kindle is fine.
Right. If it looks like a Kindle. Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because they would always come by and give me crap, right? give everyone crap,
but mostly you,
right? Well, sure. But they would say, please turn off your devices. And so what I would do, I'd click it once and throw it in the seat back. It wasn't off. The screen was off. The computer was still, the tablet, the phone, it was still on.
Yeah.
We have been doing in-air testing of devices effect on airplane communications for the last 20 years. Because none of us actually turns our damn devices off.
No.
We just made the screen
go
off.
dark and
turn
it's
on
off. Airplane mode.
Yeah,
and
maybe if we feel like it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's crazy.
So you mean no, you never do?
No, of course not. No. Although apparently, now this is the downside, the evil side of this. I've heard that some planes, I've literally not taken a flight since they've made this rule or changed it. You can actually make and take cell phone calls now. Is that true?
No.
No? Because I've heard that some are enabling like 3G and 4G like phone calls, and that would just be wrong.
Yeah, no. Specifically, they tell you have to be in airplane mode. And specifically, they say that you can use the internet if you want to use the internet on plane and pay whatever the exorbitant fee is. And several things you can't do. Watch streaming video, can't make phone calls. There's a couple of others. So, I mean, that was always my fear, is if they make phone calls easy, it's going to be, it's going to be a, crosstown bus again, which is just an awful experience.
Well, it's not like your average airplane experience is fabulous now.
It isn't, but let's,
Yeah, agreed.
If we bring back, my contention is if we're going to bring back phone calls, let them smoke, because we might as well ruin everything.
Yeah, actually, you know what? If I had to choose between phone calls and smoking, I think I would choose the smoking.
I would. I really would.
Yeah.
So you had an Apple IIe.
No, 2 Plus.
2 Plus. Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't want to get,
Dude, what?
grunge. Yeah, I know. And so when did you start doing for a living? You went to college? Or did you do it on the side at all before then?
I did. I actually, when I took my little Dungeons and Dragons character sheet generator, and I made like 10 copies of my program, and I put it in a little Ziploc bag with a little piece of paper, and I brought it to like a D&D convention. And I talked somebody into letting me put up a little stand where I didn't sell a single copy. Not one.
Wow, really?
No, but not one copy. Yeah.
Wow, that does feel like when we were at Gen X, but go on.
Nice. We sold one.
We did. I bought one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I was writing software from the school, my high school, right? They wanted something to manage their track meets. So I wrote that.
Nice.
And actually the computer science professor, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I remember, there was like 2 semesters. There was like 2 semesters of a programming class, right? And I took that. And I remember my final exam, where we were supposed to write a sorting program, right? And of course, I knew how to write a sorting program. So my challenge was to do it in as few lines as possible in AppleSoft Basic. And we weren't writing it interactively on the computer and submitting it. We were writing it out in longhand on a piece of paper sitting at our desk with the computers against the wall, right? That's how we took our test. So I wanted to do it in as few lines as possible. And in AppleSoft Basic, the fewest number of lines you could write a sorting program was 2, because there was no else statement. There was an if statement, if blah, 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 then do this. And then the else was fall down to the next line of code. So the theoretical minimum was 2 lines of code. So now in Basic, you could string a bunch of lines a bunch of statements together into a single line. So I had 10, bunch of stuff, 20, bunch of stuff. And then that was my sorting program, which again, I didn't get to run before I submitted it on the piece of paper that I handed in for my final exam. And one of my most satisfying experiences to date in my whole life was my computer science professor looked at that, had no idea if it was right or not. He had to get up and type it in to see if it worked. And it did. The first, it ran for him, even though I never got to run it myself.
And of course, you mean the most satisfying experience, except for the birth of your children.
No, yeah, no, totally.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure they're not listening.
Okay, good.
They're normals.
Okay,
they would
good.
never listen to something
I just want to
like
make
this.
sure.
No, I get that.
I want to
totally.
throw you the rope.
I appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, and then he would also, this is funny too. In those days, the word processor, I have no idea what it was called on the Apple 2 Plus, people would write their papers, right, in school. And then they would freak out because they thought they were choosing the command to open their document off their disk, but they were in fact saving it. And so the software didn't say, by the way, you're saving over an existing file. Is that okay? And so they would routinely blow away their term papers because the user experience was so bad, right? The UI was so terrible. And so he would, when that happened, he didn't know how to fix it. What he would do is he would find out what class I was in and come and pull me out so that I could fix it, so that I could recover their paper. And in 2, 3, 4 years of me doing this, he never learned
Wow.
how to do this. Yeah, that was my contribution to that school.
Was it WordStar?
It might have been.
Well, Jeremy, our first interviewee in this podcast, talked about in WordStar, because you didn't have lowercase, that
Right.
the lowercase letters were reversed,
Yeah, exactly.
or vice versa.
So
I
you
don't
press
remember
the
which.
escape key and that put it into uppercase mode. So uppercase letters in WordStar were actually lowercase, and inverse uppercase were actually uppercase. It was crazy. It was not what you
awesome.
see is what you get.
Yes.
It totally was not.
But that
No.
didn't come for a decade.
No. Well, remember the Apple IIe had lowercase, but that was
No, I
just a
meant
fad.
what you see is what you get in word processing.
God,
was
yeah, no,
years,
that's true. No, you're totally
years
right.
later.
You're totally right. And in
Scary.
fact, when that happened, I was in college, and I spent all summer long doing 2 jobs. I was working 60, 80 hours a week to earn half the money for a Mac 2CX.
Wow.
Right, this is the little tiny Macintosh running System 7. And that my end of it was $3,000. And then I had to go and get my mom to pay for the rest. My mom has been supporting my computer habit for kind of a long time now,
Wow.
actually. Yeah. It's my mom's fault that I'm like this. It's really,
Well, that's what you always say when we're off mic. So
that's totally true.
she's not listening either, right?
No. But before I had, the Mac 2CX, I was in a fraternity way off campus. And there was always a line at the computer lab to type, your programs into Unix, right? And it was, so instead what I did was, I went and I actually found a real VT100, a DEC VT100 terminal, and a modem. And I put it up in my fraternity room and I would sit there and dial into the computer. And this was a huge, big deal.
Yeah.
And I would type ATDT in the phone number. I knew I was really talking directly to the modem, and then I'd log in and it would be VT100 terminal emulation and VI and that whole thing. And it was all from the comfort of my own.
room.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was,
Wow. It was like the beginning of your tappy knowledge. Yeah.
oh God. Don't bring that up, dude. What are you doing? But yes.
And so you, did you program computers for a living while at college at all, or?
So I did. So my first job, my first professional job in computers was actually desktop publishing, and I spent a year doing that.
Oh, nice.
And then
PageMaker and all that?
it was some program.
Quark, maybe?
No, it was some IBM program.
Oh,
It was early 90s, late 80s.
Oh, okay.
I don't honestly remember what it was.
That's okay.
But it was my job to make it come out right when you printed it.
Right.
That was the whole thing. And then I went from there and I was a computer lab attendant, right? So somebody went to the computer lab and they didn't know how to make it print, or they didn't know how to access their files and their whatever. I was there to help them.
Right.
And then I would also help them with their homework. They would come to me in classes that I wasn't taking and say, how do I make, this statistical package work? And I never used that statistical package, but it was my job to figure it out
Right.
and teach them, right? That's when I first programmed R, actually.
Oh, really?
Way
Wow.
back. Yeah, I was in college.
It's
That
having
was-
sort of a resurgence.
It is.
right
It
now.
absolutely
Yeah.
is. Yeah. I didn't like it then. I don't like it now, but yeah. And then from there, I actually went to work my first programming job. I was building a bug database. But the interesting thing about it was for tracking actual bugs. I was working for the plant pathology department at the University of Minnesota, and the farmers would dial up and say, oh, here's the weather conditions, here's the bugs I'm seeing in my field, and it's all about tracking bugs around the state of Minnesota, actual bugs.
Bugs.
It was a bug database, yes. I thought that was awesome.
That is hilarious.
Yeah, and that was all in DBase. So I was a
2 or 3.
Oh God, I don't even know if I knew what the number was. I mean, I learned DBase just for that job, and I don't even know if I knew. It was way before Fox Pro.
Yeah,
it was way before any of that stuff, and it was. If somebody can map the version number, I was only allowed to load 7 tables at a time. Right?
I think that was 2 because I spent a lot of time.
Oh, there you go.
My favorite story about DBase was always Ashton Tate came out with DBase 2, and it was sort of this big deal. Everyone could write databases now. And it was called DBase 2 because he wanted people to think it was a mature product.
Oh, really?
There was no ever a DBase 1.
That's awesome.
Ever.
I remember, I think we did some Clipper work too, so you could compile it and make it run faster.
I spent like 9 years in Clipper.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
Crazy.
Yeah. So that was a year. And then some fraternity brothers, they were like 3, 4, 5 years ahead of me, came and they were looking for geeks at a fraternity party for their startup. And they hired me, right? I was a part-time programmer. I was writing C code on Unix System 5 revision 3 x86 machines. And it was my job to do absolutely everything, actually. I was 19, 20.
Wow.
And some product manager, and the air quotes again, would hand me a spec. And really the spec was all the stuff he'd promised to the customer to make the sale in a printout. And it was my job to put all those features into a piece of software.
Wow.
He never asked me, could we do it? He never asked how long it was going to be. He said, here's the set of features. Here's when you're installing it. Right. And that was my job to make it work. And so I would order the computer. I would install all the telephony cards because I was building integrated voice response, right? Voicemail and auto attendant and stock lookup and movie lookup and that kind of thing. And I would order all the cards to hook the computer to the phone lines. And I would install all the software. I would install the development tools. I would write all the software. I'd write the documentation. I'd bundle it all up. I'd ship it out to the customer site. I would follow it on that same plane. I would set it up and I would train all the employees that had to use the software on their premise. I would hook up a modem because then I would fly home and wait by the phone in my cubicle for them to call and complain that it wasn't doing this or that or whatever. I would dial up through the modem, fix it live on the site, recompile, redeploy live on the site, and then wait for them to call again.
Wow.
And I mean, then the product manager would come by and say, here's another system, go and do the same thing. And I was literally doing what is now, between 6 and 12 or 24, 30, whatever, however many people, I was doing the entire work all myself of an entire end-to-end software development team.
Wow.
And I had no idea. I just thought that that's what you did. And I was just this.
In many ways back then, there were a bunch of companies where that is what you did.
Yeah, totally.
That wasn't unique.
But I will tell you, there is nothing in the whole world that will give you better focus on the needs of your end customer than them calling you to yell at you on the phone with your own personal phone number to tell you how it's fucked up.
Yeah.
I mean, it is amazingly focused. And I have been like that ever since. Right? The customer, I only care about the customer being happy. The rest is all details.
Yeah.
Right? And I had to learn. I mean, I was just some, geek who programmed AppleSoft Basic for 4 years in my mom's basement, right? I had to learn how to take an angry customer and talk them down off the ledge, figure out what was the problem, figure out what they thought the expected behavior was, make that happen, and check back with them. And this was not an overnight thing. This took me months to learn how to do.
Absolutely.
When I got it wrong, they would call my bosses and tell them how terrible a person I was. I mean, I was learning all of this. It was a sink or swim kind of a deal.
Absolutely.
And it made all the difference. I mean, that was how I learned how to be a software engineer.
Sure. Did you have any early mentors you worked with that sort of a turning point in your career, or anyone you really looked up to, or
So not at that company.
Sure.
I really didn't.
since you were
But,
the guy?
well, as it turns, well, I wasn't actually. I mean, one of the founders was what we would call the CTO or VP of engineering at the
Sure.
time. And there was I don't know, 2 or 3 of us. One college student and a couple of other guys. Me, I was the college student, right? And so I wasn't the guy, but I mean, I would do the whole thing. The first time I had a real mentor was when I went to Intel.
Oh, okay.
And so back in those days, after 6 or 7 of these systems over 2 or 3 years, I figured I'd learned all I cared to learn.
Sure.
Right. I mean, I was bored. I was doing the same thing over and over. I mean, and this has kind of been the way I run my career, right? I will stay in a job as long as I love it. And as soon as I'm bored, as soon as I start repeating myself, as soon as I'm not learning anything new, I got to go find something else, because that's the thing that keeps me fresh and happy to go into work every day. Is I got something new to learn. So
It's that passion.
yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, and so I posted my my resume on the internet in 1992, which meant at that time, since there was no HTTP or web, I uploaded it to an FTP server that people knew to look for geeks looking for jobs.
I was hoping it was going to be a Gopher request, honestly.
Well,
but
being from the University of Minnesota, right, where Gopher was
course.
invented, right, I definitely spent some time in Gopher. But, since nothing ever useful was exposed in Gopher, right, it wasn't such a big deal. So I uploaded it to an FTP server, and Intel came calling. And I thought, this will be huge. They made me an offer that was like double my salary. It went from like 35,000 to 55,000 or something. I was like, oh my God, this is all the money in the world.
Yeah.
And they flew me and my wife at the time out to Oregon, to Portland, where I still live, by the way, because of Intel.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I can finally go and work at a real software company and learn how software is really made.
At Intel.
At Intel, the computer inside. Yeah. I learned later that wasn't such a good idea, except turns out, there was one, so, I was on a project and, they killed it, and it was, working at the time, job number one at Intel was definitely writing software that ran crappy on this generation of processors so that people would have to buy the next generation of processors, right? I mean, that's what you did.
To prove out Moore's law.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was morally, it was not good for me as a software guy, right? I didn't like that. So yeah, I was not a fan of Intel as a software place, and I didn't stay long. But the thing that I learned, and the mentor, you asked me about a mentor, was the best thing that I ever did was we formed like a little study group, and we worked through Steve McConnell's Writing Solid Code. Yeah. And what would happen is every week, every Friday, we would get together, and somebody would have read one of the chapters, and we'd tell each other about it. Right. And in the year that we did that, I think I became a 10 times better software engineer. Just the act of hearing and learning all of those things was a huge help. But also, and Steve McConnell was like amazing, right? That book's amazing. Yeah. It's one of the 5 books you should read. But the other thing is, it taught me how to learn technology, learn material well enough to be able to give a presentation, right? To tell somebody about it. And if you're describing it to somebody else, you have to know it to a whole nother level. Yeah. And so we do that every Friday over lunch. It was like an hour a week. Yeah. And that was the single so we mentored each other. Yeah, you really did. Right? It was amazing. That was an amazing experience for me. And was it at Intel that you started to get a sense of what it was like to not programming in a bubble? Because that was sort of a leap I made in my career, where I was suddenly working with a group of people, not one guy building one thing, which is a whole different experience. So it was interesting. No, I didn't learn that there. Oh, interesting. And the reason why was because I was the guy who came in with real telephony background. Oh, okay. I wasn't a Windows programmer, but I was, and we were building telephony boards at the time to put on people's desktops to make it easy to forward their calls and have conference calls and things like that, which were very difficult at the time because
Sure.
of the phone that you have at your desk was impossible to use, right?
Right.
People had no idea how to do any of those things.
And this is before you wrote the book on it and all that.
Oh, it was
Wait.
before the
Okay.
Windows Telephony API. Yeah. So we had a whole team that I was sitting next to building firmware and hardware and that's where the Windows Telephony API came from, right? Tappy.
Yeah.
Came out of Intel, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they designed Tappy, and they built it so that you talk to the API, and you do something called capabilities query, where you'd say, because we didn't know what the underlying hardware could do.
Right.
Right? Could it forward calls? Could it make calls? Could it?
Check messages, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it turned out to be impossible, right? It was a horrible, horrible architecture, but it's what we had.
Right.
And it was an experiment, right? It was way, when the pendulum swings, right, between simplicity and capability, this was the worst of all possible worlds, as it turns out. And I know this because I was the guy who had to write apps. And the very first app I wrote was the one that said, tell me about all the devices on the machine, tell me about all the capabilities of all the devices on the machine, so that I could actually understand what I could do with the devices on my machine.
Sure.
And so I was I built a thing on my own. I didn't actually I sort of did. But I made friends that I still have to this day, and I learned how to program way better.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
But then I didn't have the, working in a bubble kind of experience like you did. Mm-hmm. But in that job, I had an important experience that every engineer has to go through, which is I was on a project that I was putting my heart and soul into for 2 years.
Wow.
And management came one day and killed it. All that work, all those people, and I was devastated.
Absolutely.
I was crushed. I was heartbroken. All that work gone, poof. I'd never had anything like that happen to me before.
So you have that bug that many developers have, and that great joy of actually delivering. It's not a job; it's a passion.
Yeah, and you want to share it. You want to ship
Absolutely.
it. Yeah. So So I was crushed, and as it turns out, you know what? Sometimes projects get canceled, and I learned that. And, somebody decided we're building a thing that no one's actually going to want. So we should stop and put those engineers on something else, something more leveraged, something with higher priority, something that's going to make an impact to the business, something that's going to make an impact in the world as a whole. That was a good thing. Absolutely. But as an engineer who just sunk 2 years of my life into it, I was devastated, and it had never happened to me before. So I felt like, a gunslinger that was forced to sit with his back to the door instead of to the wall. I was always looking over my shoulder, I couldn't commit to anything more at Intel.
Sure.
Because I expected them to just cancel it.
It's like being cheated on with a woman.
That's right. You can never trust them again. Absolutely. Well, that one.
Our personal experience is caveat, this doesn't happen to everybody.
It doesn't happen to everyone. It's never happened to me, actually, come to think of it.
Good.
Yeah, that was handy.
That's awesome.
Maybe we should have a different podcast of a different topic if you want to get this out, Sean.
I don't want to get it out.
Okay, great. Okay. So,
you know who you are.
Nice. If you think you're so vain, you probably think this song's about you, right?
Yeah,
that's okay. Okay, great. So, I was kind of open to a new opportunity. And, at that point, there was this new technology called COM and Olay that was all the rage. And I noticed that the local college was doing like a 5-day short course, but it had happened like the week before.
Wow.
And I called them up and I said, hey, when's your next one happening? And they said, well, we don't have one scheduled, but if we have certain like 10 or 12 or whatever, we'll have another one.
Cool.
And so what I did was I sent an email to the entire employee base of Intel, which is tens of thousands of people.
Yeah.
And not just the ones locally, right? I'm talking worldwide. I'm like, hey, who wants to go to this course with me?
The employees mailing list.
That's right. All of them.
I want to go to a comm class and I have kittens. Yeah.
Come to my office. So I got enough people together for this class. And I'll give you one guess who was teaching.
Don.
Yeah, it was Don Box.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was the second time he'd ever taught the course.
Wow.
Yeah. And, I was definitely in school and in this class, definitely one of those obnoxious kids that needed to show people how smart I was. I always had my hand raised. I always had the question. I always had the smart ass comment. I always had the answer to the hypothetical questions. I had the answers, right? Right. I was totally that kid.
The rhetorical questions as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I had the answers to the rhetorical questions. I said that, and that's what I meant. Yes. And so by the first day at lunchtime, Don asked me if I'd ever thought about teaching. And, public speaking was, a class I had to take in high school when I was 17. And I was just as terrified as everyone else to get up and speak in front of the pretty girl in the first row. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so I had never thought, but by Friday, I had talked to both partners. Don was one.
Mm-hmm.
Of seriously coming to work for Develop Mentor.
Wow.
Which was, a remote company based in Torrance, California. And I didn't want to move to Torrance. They said, no problem. You can work from wherever you are. And so that's when I went and became a public speaker. And that's when I really became a contributing member. That's when I wrote the telephony book to start, and then a bunch of others. That's when I would start speaking around the world. That's when I would write all those short courses, and Don and I invented Gorilla Windows and then Gorilla Com, and I was the second Com instructor at Develop Mentor, and I had a wonderful 8-year history.
Wow.
There, and so that's when I really had my first mentor. That's Don was really my mentor.
Sure.
And Don was a lot of people's mentor, right?
Of course.
I mean, he was such a...
There was 4 years there where he was the entire Windows developers' mentors, really. I mean, let's be honest.
I'm starting to run into people who don't know who Don Box is, which kind of freaks me out. But he was such a huge part of the Windows ecosystem, the Windows community.
Huge.
Yeah. And so he was a mentor. And the cool thing about Don was, he always told me, you don't want to be me. You want to be the best you can be, right? Take the techniques, see what I do, see what other people do that you like. Go out and tell the story, be the instructor, the teacher, the consultant, the storyteller. Mm-hmm. That's what I really learned from him. Be the storyteller.
Find your voice. Don't try to mimic.
Yeah. And so he was a huge mentor for me. He was my first real mentor.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And a great mentor, honestly.
Oh, he was fabulous. And he's still one of my closest friends to this day.
You're sleeping in his
I am staying in his house this week.
Tonight?
Yes.
I mean,
no.
Oh, okay.
No. Barb's
not
there.
Anymore.
No, but I'm down the hall.
Oh, okay. Well, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Just lovely. And so... thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Thanks
Anytime.
for being my best man.
You're absolutely welcome. Well, we'll see if you're still thanking me after the bachelor party.
Let's hope I am.
Hopefully you'll still be able to speak.
Hopefully we're still speaking to each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're still speaking to your bride-to-be.
Well, there's two kinds of friends, right?
Yes.
The first kind of friend will help you move. Second kind of friend will help you move a body.
Yes, I understand. Sean, I will totally help you move that body.
Okay.
Totally.
I was told hookers don't count.
This is that female-friendly show that we've been trying to record this whole time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, someone's going to get in trouble for this episode.
Excellent.
It's going to be you. Well, thanks again for coming on, and thanks for